What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Daniel Starkand, and we are continuing our series on the 2022 preview, obviously in the midst of a crazy offseason, and yet looking ahead to 2022, trying to get our arms around where the Dodgers roster currently stands. Today, we're talking bullpen. Daniel, this is a group that in 2021 was fascinating. I think a lot of people would have had concerns about this group, and yet you look at how things finish, and it's safe to say the 2021 bullpen was one of the best in franchise history.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely the best I could remember, and I feel like the Dodgers have had some, pretty good bullpens in recent years. But whether it be like the guys you expected to perform, they went out and performed, and
Yeah.
then credit to Andrew Friedman, a bunch of under the radar guys who like in spring training we had no clue who they were, like whether they were in the Dodgers organization, like non-roster invitees, or guys who they went out and acquired like at different times throughout the year. Like there's a lot of guys who came on and performed really well. So credit to Friedman for finding those guys, and credit to those guys for making the adjustments or whatever the case may be to kind of
Yeah.
get their careers back on track in some guys' cases. But I thought the bullpen was really good. I think not just like the top end high leverage guys, but I also think they had like a lot of depth to the point
Yeah.
where like sometimes like the sixth, seventh, eighth guys in the bullpen were also like very trustworthy.
Yeah, it's a fascinating group because it follows a theme. Again, if you missed it, we did one of these on the bullpen or on the rotation as well as the lineup. And in all three of these groups, there's two approaches Dodger fans could make. On one, they could focus on all of the guys who are gone and say, oh, well, this guy's a free agent, this guy's a free agent, this guy's signed elsewhere. But you could also look at the group that's there. And I think if you focus on the guys that are gone, you would assume that the Dodgers are going to be terrible in every facet because Seager is gone and Scherzer is gone, etc. But when you look at each of these individual groups, they're still very, very good. And the bullpen is like that. Kenley Jansen, currently a free agent as we record this. Joe Kelly's a free agent. Corey Knebel's a free agent. Danny Duffy, if you want to throw his name in there, is a free agent. Jimmy Nelson is gone as well. And so the question then is, what do they have going on? What do they have left? And so the plan for today is we're going to talk about who they currently have. We'll talk about what needs they may or may not have. We'll talk about free agents, mostly focusing on Jansen, Kelly, and Knebel and whether there's a spot for them. And then lastly, we'll make predictions. So let's talk about the current roster. And the headline here is that Blake Treinen is the headliner. He is the closer in 2022 as things stand. Some other guys of note currently on the roster: Brusdar Graterol, Phil Bickford, Alex Vesia, Tommy Kahnle, who has not made an appearance for the Dodgers but has been in the organization for a year as he's rehabbed, Caleb Ferguson, who missed all of last season, Victor Gonzalez, Evan Phillips, Justin Brule, Clevenger, Nunez, Price, Vasquez, White, Grove, and Jackson. Those are all of the guys that are currently on the 40-man roster. Now, some of those guys, a guy like Grove, Jackson, White, they will be there. I think some other guys, Vasquez, Price, based on our conversation, starting rotation. Nunez are dudes, who knows whether or not they're on the 40-man roster once the season begins. But would you agree, before we do a deep dive on each of these guys individually, would you agree that even as it currently stands, that's a pretty good bullpen, right?
Yeah, definitely. And also like even take away like potential, like big name free agent signings, there's always the possibility of adding the under the radar
Yeah.
guys that the Dodgers seem to hit on every year. So if you take the guys they already have, plus, a couple guys who we've never heard of, but by May might be throwing key innings,
Yeah.
I definitely think it's a solid, group to work with, even if they made, no moves at all.
Totally. And that moves us to the next piece, which is where do the bullpen needs? And I kind of write, how good are Graterol, Bickford, Kahnle, and Vesia? Caleb Ferguson you could add in there as well, because that's kind of the biggest question. So let's start at the top of the bullpen and move down. And it starts with Blake Treinen. He is the de facto closer. It's fascinating looking at his 2021 numbers. He was actually better than Kenley Jansen in a lot of ways this past year. So he had a better ERA. He threw more innings. He had a better FIP than Kenley Jansen last season. He had less strikeouts, also had less walks. But then you look at the StatCast stuff, and look, you could do the pitching ninja thing. I think he won some awards there, but his StatCast numbers are insane. He had the best average exit velocity in all of baseball, 100th percentile. He was 99th percentile in barrel rate, 98th percentile in hard hit percentage, 97th percentile in expected ERA, expected weighted on base average, 99th percentile in expected slugging, 86th percentile in strikeout rate, 86th percentile in chase rate, 71st percentile in whiff rate. No matter how you look at it, this guy was amazing. We're going to do a little exercise here called buy or sell. It's something we used to do. But buying or selling Blake Treinen as one of the 10 to 15 best pitchers in all of baseball in the relief pitching side.
Yeah, yeah, I buy that absolutely. I mean, you could point out the Statcast numbers, and you could just
Yeah.
watch him pitch, and it makes sense, right? Like you see how much the slider's moving, you see how he's throwing a 98-mile-an-hour sinker that just
Yeah.
falls off the table. The guy's just downright nasty, and like he could pitch in any situation. Like you could bring him in with guys on base, and fully trust him. You could obviously give him a clean inning, and he's shown like he could go 8 pitches, and then you could send him out there for another inning. Like he's one of those relievers that you really just truly trust in any situation. I'm not gonna sit here and take a victory lap because I was the hire
Yep. It's true.
between us two last offseason when they re-signed him. But even then, like I didn't expect him to be as good as he was, just because we saw the year before, like his strikeout
Yep.
rate was way down, even though he was still filthy. Like there was the underlying numbers from
Yep.
2020 weren't nearly as good as they were this season. So that contract is now looking like a steal. I think it was like 3 years at like around like 8 million a year
Yeah.
or whatever. And like you said, he's like pretty much unquestionably one of the 10 best relievers in baseball at this point. So I feel really good that regardless of what moves are going to be made this offseason, the fact that you have Blake Treinen either as your closer that you could just slide in if they don't re-sign Kenley, or like as your high leverage seventh or high leverage come or whatever. Like that's a good start to any bullpen
Yeah,
right
yeah, he
there.
signed a 2-year, $17.5 million deal with the Dodgers last season. So obviously that
And I think there's a club option for a
I think
third
you're right.
year,
I
if I'm
think you're
not
right with like a
mistaken.
$1.5 million buyout as well. Yeah, so
Hmm.
I think you're right. I think it does factor out to 3 years and 24 million, which is fantastic. So just out of curiosity, I mean, would you deploy him as a traditional closer, or would you kind of go because Kenley Jansen, as long as he has been there, he wants to be the
Hmm.
closer. Like, but a lot of teams have
Right.
wanted to move away and just say, hey, put your best guy in the biggest moment. How would you handle it? Because if as it currently stands, Blake Treinen stands alone in the Dodger bullpen as the best guy there. So
Hmm.
would you have him in a traditional closer role, or would you have it kind of a bullpen by committee kind of a thing and put him in the biggest spot in the biggest moment, even if that's the seventh inning?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I'd go with the latter of what you just said. Like I'm not
Yeah.
anti-closer by any means, but like also like if it's a one-run game in the eighth inning and the top of the order, middle of the order is coming up, I'd rather have trying and pitch that
Yeah.
inning than just saving for the ninth when it would be the bottom of the order. I mean, I still think they're gonna, even if they don't re-sign Kenley, like they're gonna have other options that you trust in high leverage, and we're gonna get into those guys, of course. But I just want to see Treinen facing
Yeah.
like the biggest threat the opposing team could give. And I know he's comfortable in that because that's what we've seen the last 2 years. Like he's not a guy. You talk about how Kenley is comfortable in the closer's role and wants to be a closer. I don't think Treinen, feels that way at all. Like I think he's fine pitching any
Yeah.
inning at any point in the game. And me personally, I like him in that role. I understand like if Kenley doesn't come back, it just feels natural just to be like, oh yeah, we have Blake Treinen. He's our closer now. But I just think with like the way the game's moving, I don't think you need one set
Yeah.
closer. I think it's more important to have like your best pitcher face their best
Yeah.
hitters.
And again, like one of the fascinating storylines will be the Dodgers had a few guys that you could put Jansen in the ninth because you had Treinen everywhere else. It's like you didn't worry about,
Sure.
oh, well, we're not going to save Jansen for the ninth because it's like, again, you could argue Treinen was actually better than Jansen, as good as Jansen was last season. And Joe Kelly was really good and Corey Knebel was really good. This year, again,
Yep.
it's kind of one guy at the back of the bullpen and then a handful of guys in the high leverage. So let's get to that group. I've got 5 guys in the high leverage group, and we'll go through these 5, and you tell me buying or selling whether or not this guy is a realistic high leverage guy. And we'll start in no particular order, but let's start with Brusdar Graterol. It's a guy that had an up and down regular season. Ever since he's been here, he throws 102. He looks like a high leverage reliever, and yet the performance has never totally matched up. Postseason, he was really good though. 9 innings, just 1 earned run, 7 strikeouts though, so the strikeout rate still an issue even in the postseason. No walks, 8 appearances. Again though, regular season numbers were not necessarily encouraging. I believe he had a ERA in the high 3s last season. Let's see. 4.18. So 4.18 ERA last season. So Brusdar Graterol, as it stands, buying or selling him as a high leverage 7th, 8th, ninth inning guy in a Dodger bullpen next year.
Yeah, I'm gonna buy him, but I'm also like a little cautious just because I need it. Like I need to see more of what we
Yeah.
saw in the postseason from him. Like if we're getting that guy, like absolutely, no question about it. He was downright nasty. But you just read out the regular season numbers, and they obviously weren't great. And he also like he was in the
Yeah.
minors for a while, and those like you could look at
Yeah.
those numbers, they're
Yeah.
not great either. So I think he still like has a ways to go. He's still really young, like 22 years old or whatever. So I think he still has work to do if he wants to. People pinned him as the future closer when they got him kind of. I don't think he's
Yeah.
there yet. I still think he needs to work on, that slider. He needs to develop that a little more. He's if you look at the strikeout numbers, they're nowhere
Yeah.
near what they should be for a guy who has the pure
Below
stuff that
7
he does. So
strikeouts per inning last season for Gratterall.
yeah, that's that's not just not good, like that's
Yeah. Yeah.
horrible, especially for a guy throwing 102. So I think it's definitely possible. Like we'll see what he looks like in spring training. I think it's there's a non-zero chance he comes out and looks like the second best guy behind Treinen, but there's also a chance that he comes out and looks like he
Yeah.
did just last
Yeah.
year, like in the regular season. So I'm buying him just because it's hard not to buy a guy who throws 102 the way he does or whatever. But also, like, I need to see more of what we saw in the
Yeah,
postseason.
to put his strikeout in context, David Price struck out 6.68 batters per 9 innings last year in the exact same number of innings. So about 0.3 more strikeouts per 9 from Gratterall than David Price was getting. And if you watched our last episode, you know how Daniel and I feel about David Price and his future. I think I'm actually selling Gratterall, and I'll frame it this way, which isn't how I framed it to you, to be clear, was I would not be banking on Gratterall as a high leverage reliever. I would not plan my 2022 roster construction. I could have done a better job of asking you this question, but I would not plan my 2022 roster construction on the assumption that Gratterall is ready. I like the glimpses that we have seen, but he's not like getting penciled into the Joe Kelly role. He's not getting penciled in to the Corey Knebel role in my estimation. Again, 9 innings, 1 earned run in the playoffs. That was when the moment was big, the biggest, and he was ready for it. He progressed at, the end of the season. I thought in my mind, I was like, oh, he was much better at the end of the season. He actually wasn't really. His September-October ERA was not very good.
Well, we had him off the
Yeah.
postseason roster, like going into October.
Yeah,
so.
totally. So, anyways, as far as Gratterall goes, I think it's a fascinating one, but I will tentatively sell Gratterall. But I'm with you. I mean, on stuff, he belongs there, whether he puts it together. And there's been some debate about the development of a breaking ball and whether it has arrived, but that's with Gratterall. Next guy on my list, again, this is in no particular order, is Phil Bickford, 26-year-old first-round pick in 2015, from the San Francisco Giants. He bounces around. The Dodgers claim him off waivers. Really, really impressive. Obviously, this past season, he throws 50 innings for the Dodgers. He strikes out 10.55 guys per 9 innings, 2.50 ERA. StatCast numbers to him, very favorable. Expected weighted on base average, expected ERA, both in the 80th plus percentile, 76th percentile in whiff. Buying or selling Phil Bickford as a high leverage. I know both of us like Bickford. Is he a high leverage?
Yeah.
Are you buying him? And I'll frame it the way I should have framed it the first time. Would you plan the 2022 roster around the idea that Bickford is in that 4 to 5 guys that you trust in late inning big spots?
Yeah, so I'll say I'm not buying him as like your second best guy, or maybe even your third, but fourth or fifth, I'm absolutely buying him. I thought, Bickford, like you said, he came out of nowhere, but I thought he was really good. You read out the numbers. He doesn't have quite the stuff that Gratterall has, but he has way better control. His breaking ball is way better, and the guy's just a workhorse. Like it felt like in the middle of the season there, in like the June, July, August months when guys are hurt, there's bullpen games. Like it felt like he was pitching just about every day and was effective just about every day. And obviously, it's not like I mean, I will say he did once have a high prospect status, but when the Dodgers got him, it's not like there were a ton of teams that were high on him. His career was kind of going south, and he comes to LA and things turn around, which is great. So I'm buying that, but I'm also not, I'm not saying that, he's going to slide right into Treinen's role if Kenley's gone. I still think the Dodgers probably need to go out and get someone to be in, those second and third guys. But if all these guys, and we're going to talk about them, like if they're your like fourth or fifth best guys, I think you're in a really good spot. I think if they're like your second or third, then maybe it's still good, but not quite as good.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you touched on depth earlier. I think that was the strength of the group, as you said, in 2021. And Bickford's a perfect example. If Phil Bickford's your fifth or sixth best reliever, which he was last year, you could make an argument he might have been seventh or eighth. I mean, he was fantastic. 2.50 ERA in 50 innings pitched. You cannot argue with that. I mean, the guy was fantastic all the way around. now the FIP was 3.57. So it's not like he was like completely fortunate and fluky in that performance. Right. But I'm with you. The stuff is not to a degree where I'm looking at it. And again, some of the StatCast isn't favorable for him. If you look at the exit velocity, hard hit, barrel percentage, it's not good for him. And so I think he's a very, very good relief pitcher. He's a guy you're excited to have under team control for a few more seasons, but he's not a guy that I would say, yeah, we're set. Joe Kelly, thanks. Have a great offseason. Enjoy the rest of your career somewhere else because we've got Phil Bickford. Okay, next on the list, let's go to Alex Vesia, another guy the Dodgers traded for. Now, he's a fascinating one. I looked at his splits this season. He threw 10.2 innings pitched in May and June before being sent down, and he was not good. He walked 11 guys in 10 2/3. It was brutal. He comes back on July 9th. He throws 29 1/3 innings pitched. He had an ERA under 1. His ERA was 0.92. He struck out 38 guys in 29 innings and had just 11 walks. So he has 11 walks in 10 innings his first stint. He has 11 walks in 29 innings his second stint. He throws left-handed. He has a pitch that nobody seems to be able to hit for whatever reason. It's not that it's throwing 95. Or it is 95. It's not 100, but he's from the left side. Are you buying or selling Alex Vesia as the best left-handed pitcher in a very good bullpen?
I am absolutely buying all the Alex Vesia stock. If anyone's selling, I will buy it. To me, like it's interesting. Like when they go out and get a guy, obviously none of us had ever heard of Alex Vesia when they make that trade. We were a little bummed to see Floro go because we
I was a big Floro guy over here.
Yeah. But like when the trade happens, we see kind of the reasons. Like we see that he's got that vertical rising fastball that you were just talking about. And you see like, okay, they see this upside in him. And then like as the season goes along, you see him like realize that upside. And to me, like when like it makes sense why a guy is succeeding, to me, that means like it's more sustainable. So I think with Vesia, like we saw, he's throwing that high fastball and no one's touching it. He's got a nice breaking ball to go along with it. And also like just his energy, I feel like is infectious and no, there's no tangible number to go along with that. But I think that matters, especially in a 162 game season. Like there's some nights where guys, the energy is just low and you need someone to pump that in. And I think Alex Vesia could do that. I think, you pointed out the bad numbers when he first came up, and I think there's some reasons for that. Like they put him in some pretty rough spots and they kind of had no choice. Like they call him up, they're short on arms, and then they had, I think it was like 2 or 3 extra inning games against, I think it was the Milwaukee Brewers, if I'm not mistaken, in a row, and it gets to like the 11th inning and he's the only guy left there, and they bring him in with a runner on second. He's making his first ever appearance with the Dodgers. Like there's definitely nerves there. I remember he walked a bunch of guys. So I'm not going to hold that against him, even though it was bad. I think he went down and probably figured some stuff out at the minor league level and then came up and was just absolutely lights out. So I'm buying all the Vesia stock. I absolutely think he could be your like high leverage lefty guy that you bring in. When there's, let's say you're facing the Braves and Freddie Freeman's coming up, as we saw in the playoffs, like he's a guy you could bring in for that. And you could also trust him against righties too.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree with every single point you laid out was perfect. The fact that Freeman went out and got this guy is great sign. Second of all, the fact that everyone was like, well, he's got this stuff if he can ever puts it together, and then he puts it together. Again, I agree with you. That feels sustainable. I'm glad you mentioned the energy, the left-handed side, the whole deal. So I'm in on Alex Vesia. We interviewed him last spring training, and he was great as well. So personally, I'm a fan of the guy. Yeah. His story's a cool story coming from D2. So good on Alex Vesia. Okay, next guy on my list, Tommy Kahnle. This is a fascinating guy. Tommy Kahnle, the Dodger fans, again, you might be like, who is Tommy Kahnle? He threw 1 inning in 2020. He threw 0 innings in 2021. This is a guy who came over from the Yankees, pitched with the Tigers for a little bit. 2019, 3.67 ERA, a 3.33 FIP. He struck out 12.91 guys per 9 innings with a 2.93 walk per 9 in 61 1/3 in 2019. Those are fantastic numbers. Those would have been like best in the Dodger bullpen outside of like Jimmy Nelson on the strikeout side, and the walk rate definitely would have been best in the bullpen last year. 2018 was bad, 6.56 ERA in 23 innings. 2016 and 17, 2.60 ERA across 100 innings. Interesting guy. I mean, do you pencil him in to the high leverage spot? Are you buying and selling him as a high leverage guy in 2022 for the Dodgers?
I think you have to sell him for now just because, like you mentioned, like hasn't pitched at all hardly in the last 2 years. He's coming off Tommy John surgery, which, as we know, like that's a serious thing. You can't always, like, sometimes it works out, but you can't always just count on a guy coming back in his first year of Tommy John and looking great. So I think I'm selling him for now. I kind of want to compare him to like Jimmy Nelson last year a little bit. And I know I'm not, like, if you look at Jimmy Nelson's numbers, they were obviously incredible. So I'm not
Yeah.
expecting that at all. But I think if you go back to like spring training last year, I don't think anyone was penciling in Jimmy Nelson as a high
Yeah.
leverage guy. Like, he was coming off, you know, a bunch of injury plagued seasons. You know, the potential's there. I think the potential's there with Canely as well. But you're just not sure how healthy he's going to be. So for now, I'm selling him. But if he comes out and looks healthy and the velocity's up, like, he's definitely a guy who in the past has been a high leverage guy.
Yeah.
So I'm not ruling out that he could return to that level. But I just, like you were saying with some of these other guys, I just don't think you could bank on it in his first year back from Tommy
Yeah, I
John.
think Nelson is a great comp, especially just and Corey Knable too, guys that are coming back from big injuries.
Yeah.
It rarely is smooth. I think you also look at the contract number, 2 years, $5.25 million. I mean, that kind of tells you what they think about him without telling you what they think about him,
Yeah.
and also what the rest of the league thought. Now, how many teams are willing to pay a guy, $1 million to sit and do nothing for a year? Well, even if you do that, you're only paying $4 or $5 million this year. So I think he's an upside ticket. I think you pencil him in as like your
Exactly.
7th or 8th best relief pitcher. Hope that he can get 50 to 60 innings out of the guy and see what happens. But I'm with you, selling Tommy Canely as a pencil him in for a high leverage role. Okay, last one on here. It's a guy not mentioned on the bottom line here, but maybe the most interesting of this group, and that is Caleb Ferguson. Caleb Ferguson did not pitch last season, missed all of it, missed part of 2020. Well, in 2020, as a relief pitcher, a 3.06 ERA, okay, a 13.75 strikeout per nine. Again, would have been the best mark of any Dodger reliever last season. A 1.53 walks per nine. Again, would have been the best mark of any Dodger reliever last season. Was absolutely fantastic in 2020. Converted starter into a reliever, throws on the left-hand side. Coming off an injury, a lot of the same stuff we just talked about Canely, with the exception of we've seen this guy. He was one of the best pitchers in baseball. Buying or selling 2022 Caleb Ferguson as one of your best 4 or 5 relievers back end of the bullpen.
Yeah. So I'm glad you just said 2022, because I was going to say that I'm absolutely buying him long term, like that he could get back to the numbers you just said and maybe even be better. Like, he's still really young, like 23 or 24 or whatever. I just don't know if you could count on that for the 2022 season, just kind of for all the same reasons I just laid out with Canely. Like, he's coming off Tommy John surgery, and it was actually his second Tommy John surgery. Like, he had one coming out of high school, which is why the Dodgers were able to draft him, and I think it was like the 38th round or something ridiculous. But to me, like, I just need to wait and see what he looks like in spring training. Like, if he's healthy, I think he could definitely reach that level. I think we saw the state of the left-handers out of the bullpen last season, and I'd say if there was one weakness in this bullpen, it was that. Like, outside of Vesia, there really wasn't any trustworthy left-handed relievers. So I think that's perfect for Ferguson to come in and be that second left-handed guy. And he was also a guy who in the past, like you said, he used to be a starter, so he could potentially be like a multi-inning type guy. But I just think we need to see how he looks coming off his second Tommy John surgery. Like, that's that's definitely very serious. But I'm definitely buying him long term. I think he's got a bright future in this organization. I just don't, I'm selling him a bit for the 2022
Buying the
season.
2023 version of Caleb Ferguson, selling the 2022 version of Caleb Ferguson.
I'm getting in early for
I like
2023.
I like it. No, I mean, it all makes sense, everything you just said. And I think it's kind of a risk profile question if you're the Dodgers, right? Like, how much risk do you want to put on the state of your 2022 bullpen? Because you could look at Ferguson and say, pencil him in as the 4th best relief pitcher that we're going to have next year. And if you get the 2020 version, then you're absolutely justified. He's probably your 2nd best relief pitcher. But there's also the risk involved. So they could say, well, let's just bank on him being our 6th best, and if he becomes our 2nd or 3rd, then wow, our bullpen's going to be airtight. Or you could say, let's just ride out, see what happens, and if it doesn't work out, then your bullpen is below average. So I'm with you. I think he, for me, is right on the cusp of those two. The nice thing is because of when his injury happened way back in 2020, there is no risk of them rushing him back into anything. I mean, Canely, the same thing. Canely has thrown one inning in 2 seasons. So both of these guys, it's not like you're rushing him back into anything. They've had plenty of time to rest. So I think if you want to be optimistic, that's for it. But Ferguson is right on the cusp of buying and selling for me. I think I'll buy just because of how good he was. But, the best ability is availability, and whether or not he's available remains to be seen. Okay, moving on.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
just real quick to kind of close that out, I will say I think if we're just talking upside here, like I'd probably put Ferguson like
yeah,
right up there with Gratterall as like the highest upside out of all these guys. Like if he's healthy, if he's looking how he did in
yeah.
2020, like you said, he could definitely end up being your second best reliever. But it's just tough to guarantee that, like
Yeah.
you're saying, like you can't really pencil him in as that. But if he ends up being that, like
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Some other guys to mention. Low leverage. We've got Victor Gonzalez, Evan Phillips, Justin Brule, Garrett Clevenger are the four that I would pencil into that category. I'll highlight Phillips and Brule real quick because they're guys that we've talked about. Phillips, 27 years old, no options left. 3 scoreless innings in the postseason, 10 and a third, promising regular seasons. Kind of a funky delivery guy that the slider is nasty. Then you've got Brule, another lefty, 24 years old. This guy's actually been in the Dodger system his entire career. 18 and 2/3 innings. Guy had a 2.89 ERA in 21 appearances in the regular season. He doesn't strike anyone out. He's Brusdar Gratterall's best friend because his strikeout per 9 makes Gratterall look like an all-star. He's striking out 5.30 guys per 9 innings, which is a pathetic number. But also 2 scoreless innings across 3 appearances in the postseason as well. Then you've got Gonzalez, who was a hero in the 2020 World Series run. He's a fascinating one. Clevenger's a guy that a lot of StatCast people like. Go Ducks. Another left-handed pitcher as well. From that group, Gonzalez, Phillips, Brule, and Clevenger, any of those guys that you're sort of penciling in as when I plan my 2022 bullpen out, I can bank on this guy being in there?
I mean, I'd say out of those guys, the two I like the best are Phillips and actually Mike Clevenger,
Garrett
your
Clevenger.
duck. Or sorry, yeah, not the Padres pitcher, Garrett Clevenger. But I liked what I saw out of Phillips last year. I think he's got pretty good stuff. But like you said, he is out of options, so that kind of complicates things. Like obviously, you like uh, you like to have guys that in a pinch, if you,
Yeah.
like you could send them down if you have to, and then call them back up in a couple of weeks or whatever. So that's already working against him. But if he comes out and if well, first of all, if he's still in the organization come spring training, but if he comes out and has a good spring. I definitely think he'll make the roster. And then, like you said, with the StatCast stuff with Clevenger, like I just think there's upside there with him that isn't really there with Brule.
Yeah.
Like I know the ERA and stuff was good with Brule, but like if you're not missing bats as a reliever, like I feel like it's just a matter of time before the ERA and stuff catch up with the other numbers. So credit to him for being great for the Dodgers down the stretch. Like he was, there's so many injuries they were dealing with, and he was a guy who no one had ever heard of, and just kind of came up and got outs, which was big. And it's possible that happens again. You never know. And I think he'll be in the mix. Like, obviously, you need more that, like, you start off the season with 8 guys in your bullpen, but throughout the course of the season, you're going to have at least double that, like, come up. So I think we'll see him at some point. But I don't think, like, he's a guy that you could just rely on as, like, this is our lefty specialist. I don't think he's on that level. I think he's just more of a depth piece that like starts the season in AAA, and we'll see him at some point. But I like Clevenger's upside a lot, kind of similar to not nowhere near Ferguson's level, but I think he's got good stuff. He throws pretty hard. He pitched well when we did see him. He dealt with some injuries, but I think he's a guy who could eventually end up being like that lefty specialist just because lefties did not hit him at all.
Yeah, it's fascinating because we talked about how the Dodgers at times struggled with left-handed relief pitchers, and now you're looking at it and you've got Ferguson, you've got Vesia, and then of the 4 guys I just named, Gonzalez is a lefty, Brule is a lefty, and Clevenger is a lefty as well. And so kind of trying to figure out what you do with those guys. Clevenger, a 3.18 ERA in 17 innings last season. FIP was not kind to him, but there you go. So, I mean, is there a number, like is left-handed pitchers with the 3-batter rule, like would it worry you to have? Is it possible they could have 4 left-handed relievers in their bullpen to start the season, or is that too many?
I mean, I'd say probably 3. Like if you have Vesia and a healthy Ferguson, then you probably only need one more. And of those 3 guys, like it's just kind of whoever looks the best in spring training. Victor Gonzalez, I didn't even talk about him, but like with him, it was just kind of a tale of 2 seasons. Like you mentioned, he was incredible down the stretch of 2020, and it's kind of it feels wrong that like only 1 year later, like everyone's so out on him. Like I don't think I'm completely out on him, but at the same time, his numbers drop drastically after the sticky stuff crackdown. Like I don't want to accuse him of anything, but until he proves that he could get back to anywhere close to the level he was before that, I just don't think he's a guy you could really
Yeah,
count
some
on.
other guys in the organization, Darian Nunez, who made an appearance, David Price, Andrew Vasquez, and then again, Mitch White, Michael Grove, and Andre Jackson. Any of those guys that you kind of that you like in the bullpen there? I mean, all lefty.
I mean,
They're like all more lefties. You know,
there's a
Nunez
lot
is
of
another
lefties.
lefty. Vasquez is another lefty. Price is another lefty. So, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like Nunez a little bit. Like, I thought he
Yeah.
had good stuff. He throws pretty hard. He's kind of like an Aroldis Chapman
Yeah.
light, nowhere near Aroldis Chapman, of course, but he kind of looks like him
The
when he's
pitching
throwing.
style is
But
very similar.
like, first of all, we're gonna have to see like which of these guys in the organization
Yeah.
comes spring training, just because like as of now, the Dodgers 40-man roster is full, and there's still hope. We're hoping there's moves to
Yeah.
be made at some point this winter. So once those moves are made, like someone's gonna have to get DFA'd or whatever, and like some of those guys like Vasquez, and even like I don't think they DFA Evan Phillips, but like he could be a trade candidate just because of he's out of options like we talked about. So those guys you named are all just kind of depth pieces that as in 2020, like we'll probably see some of them throughout the course of the season, but I don't really think like any of those are like opening day roster, like trust them in any type of role type of guys.
Couldn't agree more. Again, I liked what I saw about Nunez, but it's like, do I like Nunez more than I like Clevenger, than I like Gonzalez? Like, maybe Gonzalez, depending on what he looks like, but it's tough. Normally, when you're a lefty, it's like, that's a good thing. In the Dodger organization, it's seemingly a tough thing. We've already talked about David Price. I love that Vasquez, they were cutting all these guys, the Rule 5 thing, and Vasquez is passing out turkeys in a Dodger jersey at Dodger Stadium. I'm like, oh no, they can't cut this guy today. So shout out to the Dodger organization. Didn't cut him that day. Might be cut coming up soon. No offense. No offense, as my good friend Daniel would say. No offense, Andrew Vasquez, but you might not be on the Dodgers come regular season time. So, okay, well, let's shift then to the free agents. And again, the headline at the bottom says internal and external. We're going to focus mostly on the internal free agents. Kenley Jansen, Joe Kelly, Corey Knebel, the three headliners. As of today, again, we're recording this a couple of days before it gets posted. Max Scherzer is gone. Corey Seager is gone. I guess the first question I'll start with is, Kenley Jansen was not in my offseason plans because I thought the price tag was going to be too high and I would rather have that money allocated elsewhere. For me, I'll start off by saying my thoughts on Kenley Jansen have not changed. I would not pay him $16 million a year that I think he at least is expecting to get. Now, if that number comes way down, I might revisit. My stance on Jansen has not changed because of Scherzer, Seager, etc. Has your stance on Kenley Jansen changed at all this postseason? Where do you stand with him and your interest in Kenley Jansen coming back?
Yeah, I'd say my stance hasn't changed either. Like, if he's willing to take a bit of a hometown discount, to come back, then I'm all for it. Like, I feel like some Dodger fans still have like a sour taste in their mouth about Kenley. I'm not there. Like, I thought he was incredible this past season and in the postseason, especially. Like, he was lights out. So I think he made some, mechanical adjustments as we saw. And it worked, and he looked like his usual dominant self. I still think he's got a couple more really good years left in him. So if he's willing to take a bit of a discount, then I'm all for it. But I just think, given the overall state of the bullpen, as we've spent all this time talking about, they're in a pretty good spot, and I don't think they're in a position where they really need to overpay for anyone. So if another team's going to offer Kenley, a 3-year, $45 million deal, like $15 million a year, like I don't think the Dodgers should match that. Like, I don't think they should feel forced to match that by any means. Like, I think there's plenty of guys in there. There's plenty of other relief options that are going to be cheaper. So I'm with you. My stance hasn't changed. Like as much as it would be nice to have Blake Treinen in his same role and have a set closer in Kenley, I just think the way the game is heading, I like the flexibility of just having every guy being ready to go whenever. And as we've seen with Kenley, he's kind of more stubborn in that he wants to be a closer. So I think the way things are moving, it's just not exactly.
Yeah, Jansen's 34 years old, coming off a season in which he threw 69 innings and 69 appearances, 2.22 ERA, 3.08 FIP, 1.8 wins above replacement. Unbelievable season, but he is 34. Now, I am more optimistic about his future because of what it appears to be some pitching changes that he has made. His ability to throw a breaking ball means he's no longer dependent on getting 95 miles an hour from the cutter. He can survive at the 93 level because the breaking ball has been so good. And yet, I'm not interested in a 3 or 4 year deal of high average annual value with Kenley Jansen. like you said, if he were more willing to be flexible and when he comes into the game, then maybe, but he doesn't appear to be. And so I'm going to be perfectly honest. As we talk about Jansen, Kelly, and Knebel, he would be my third priority on these three. I'm not saying he's the third best pitcher. I think he's the best pitcher of
Yeah.
those three. But I just think as far as value
Yeah.
and fit with what the Dodgers are trying to do, Jansen would be third for me. The next guy on this list, again, these are not in a particular order, would be Joe Kelly. Joe Kelly, if you want to talk about a guy who resurrected his image in Los Angeles, yes, he had the pouty face game that will always be a legendary moment for him. But besides that, he had been pretty bad for the first 2 years of a pretty expensive contract. This season, 48 appearances, 44 innings. So again, some injury stuff, missed the beginning of the season, comes in 2.86 ERA, 3.08 FIP. So fielding independent pitching, the exact same as Kenley Jansen this past season, 0.7 wins above replacement. Unbelievable from Joe Kelly. The Dodgers declined an option for him. I believe it was was it a $11 million option and with a $4 million buyout, so basically a $7 million decision. They decide to decline that with Joe Kelly. He is now a free agent. There are rumors that they're interested in bringing Kelly back. This wasn't a, hey, we're done for good, but more of a just the dollars and cents didn't make sense on the front end. What do you think about Joe Kelly as a free agent and his prospects potentially coming back?
Yeah, I'd say Joe's probably the most likely of all these guys to be back, just for the reason you laid out, and also like he's a local guy, like he's from Rancho Cucamonga. That was a big thing, like when he signed with the Dodgers, like he was coming home playing for the team. He grew up like going to games at Dodger Stadium. I think he enjoys being a Dodger. Like he clearly fits in that clubhouse. Like we see him wearing a mariachi suit to the White House. Just being Joe Kelly, and Joe, he's awesome. And you read the numbers, like the pitching was awesome this year too, for really the first time. Like he got off to a rocky start, as you said, but towards the end of last year, like you could argue Dave Roberts had more trust in him than pretty much anyone, just because he was in that role where when there's two guys on base, it was Joe Kelly that was coming into the game. Like he was in that fireman role. So I'd say outside of Treinen, like he was kind of their second guy. And it seemed like he came through every time. But I will say there are some health concerns. Like he's kind of dealt with some nagging issues. And I feel like with him, we never really know what it is. But he ended last season with a shoulder issue. I don't think it was like anything serious. Like I think there was a report at first that said he wouldn't be ready for spring training, but then that kind of went away. And I think I forgot who, but someone went out and clarified that the expectation is he will be. So but I just feel like that's always what it is with Joe with injuries. I don't know why, but there's just never complete when he's dealing with things. But when he was on the mound, he was great. I think his biggest issue and why he wasn't why he wasn't so successful in his first season or two with the Dodgers was his control. Like he was just kind of walking everyone. He had no clue where the ball was going. But he kind of fixed that this past season. Like, and we know this stuff is great. So if he could just kind of control get his command down, then he's got the stuff to be one of the best relievers out there. So I think just because of the role he played, his familiarity with LA, like his comfortability being home, I think there's definitely mutual interest there. And I also don't think like you said, no, he's not better than Kenley, but when he's going to be probably signing for half the amount as Kenley, like AAV wise, I think like the production is close enough that you take Joe Kelly
completely
there.
agree. Number 3 on this list, Corey Knebel, the other big name here. 20 innings pitched, 2.70 ERA for Knebel, 11.70 strikeouts per 9, which was third on the Dodgers behind Jimmy Nelson and Alex Vesia last season. He was really good. The walk rate wasn't great, but this is a guy that had missed basically almost 2 full seasons with a shoulder injury. He comes back 3.22, fielding independent pitching, so a very good mark there. Knebel, you seem to be a big guy. I mean, a big fan of his. We've seen this stuff. What are your thoughts on Corey Knebel as a free agent?
Yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of Knebel, and I'd love to see him back, but I just feel like I think he's going to be a guy that like another team kind of overpays for, maybe a team who needs a closer. Like he's been a closer in the past in Milwaukee and had a lot of success in that role. He dealt with his health issues. He had Tommy John as well, but then he comes back this season with the Dodgers and looks great. I will say he also dealt with health issues this season though. Like he missed like 2 or 3 months in the middle of the season. But he comes back, and I wouldn't say he was lights out in the playoffs, but he was still really good, and they put him in kind of an unfamiliar role, like as the opener at times, and he was willing to do it, and he did his job. So I like him. I think the stuff is great. Like when you see him throw that curveball, it's just beautiful, and he throws 98, obviously. But I just feel like there's a team out there that's probably going to overpay for him to be like their closer or setup guy or whatever. And I don't think the Dodgers really need to overpay for any relievers, if
Yeah,
we're
and
being
I think
honest.
that's the headline for me when we talk about free agents is the Dodgers don't need to overpay. We talk about, typically you've got, let's say, an 8-man bullpen. You've got Treinen, Gratterall, Bickford, Vesia, Canely, and Ferguson. There's 6. So if you want Phillips as 7
Yeah.
and you want Clevenger as 8, there's 8 already. Now, some of those,
Yeah.
Clevenger, okay, you could send him down, Brule, Gonzalez, etc. So maybe there's room for 1 or 2, but you've got 6 guys in Treinen, Gratterall, Bickford, Vesia, Canely, and Ferguson that you basically have reserved major league spots for. And so you've got room for maybe 1 or 2, and Phillips would have to be cut, if he's not one of them. So that's the piece of this that I think is most interesting is the Dodgers, while they could use, I think we would both say maybe need is a strong word. It would be really great if they went and signed the guy who's going to be their second best relief pitcher this season. That's kind of the spot. Like a starting rotation, they don't necessarily need a number 1. They need a number 3 and a number 4. And if you're the Dodgers, your number 3 starting pitcher has to be a number 2 starting pitcher on most groups. Your setup man needs to be a closer on some clubs. And so that's the area where I think they are, which moves us into the last piece of the show, which is predictions for the bullpen this upcoming season. And we'll start with a free agency prediction. We kind of just hinted at it. I think Joe Kelly comes back to the Dodgers. I think it just makes a ton of sense. I think he fits. We could talk about external free agents if we're being honest. There's not a ton of names. There are a ton of names, excuse me, but there's only one spot on the Dodger bullpen. And I don't know enough about what the Cleveland Indians 7th inning guy was doing this past season to really come on here and give you an educated opinion on every reliever out there.
Right.
To me, Joe Kelly makes a ton of sense. He fills a need. He fits perfectly in the system and it's sort of the philosophical way that the Dodgers think about pitching. He's comfortable in all situations. His strand rate was unbelievable. So my first prediction is that Joe Kelly is back with the Dodgers. I think you could sign him to a 2 or a 3-year deal and go from there. So my first prediction, Joe Kelly back with the Dodgers. Him and Treinen form the back end of the bullpen. Flexible. One guy could be the closer. One guy could be the fireman and go from there.
I will say we didn't talk about our predictions beforehand, but this was one of my predictions as well. For all the reasons you mentioned, like I think Joe will be back, and talking about external guys, I think it's if the money's the same, like I'd rather just bring back the guys we're familiar with that were really good. So I think Joe will be back. And I will say my second bold prediction is that the Dodgers will sign Daniel Hudson because I'm looking at my phone.
Okay.
And that just happened. That passed tweeted. Brandon Riller, Daniel Hudson, and the Los Angeles Dodgers are nearing an agreement on a 1-year deal. When completed, it's expected to be around $7 million. So Daniel Hudson, that's the guy we're familiar with. He was here a couple years ago. Ends up being really good on the Nats the year they won that World Series. Gets traded to the Padres this past year. I'm sure you're looking up the numbers right now. That's what it looks like. But I think he's a guy who's good. And 1 year, $7 million. We talk about not overpaying. Like I feel like that's not an overpay.
It's funny that you say here's a guy we're familiar with because I was like, oh yeah, he pitched for some teams in the division. Oh, he pitched for the Dodgers in 2018. Just a very forgettable Dodgers career. He made 40 appearances and threw 46 innings for the Dodgers.
Very mediocre with the Dodgers.
So there you go. 2019, the next year was his best year. 2.47 ERA across appearances with the Blue Jays and then the Nationals. 2020, he was dreadful. 21 appearances, 6.10 ERA, but then bounces back this past year. 54 appearances, 51 innings pitched, 3.31 ERA. You want to talk about a strikeout rate, 13.06 strikeouts per 9, 2.79 walks per 9. So again, both of those numbers would have been the best in the Dodgers bullpen this past season. Now, again, we're recording this to be posted at a later date. I mean, does a Daniel Hudson signing impact the Joe Kelly prediction that we just made?
I mean, probably just because the money's the same and also like the role's the same. Like you could put Daniel Hudson as like your second or third guy. I think maybe there's probably one more bullpen signing to be made just because like 1 year, $7 million, like that's not super significant by any means. So I think like you could go give Joe Kelly like pretty much maybe a 2 or 3 year deal with the same AAV, like 2 years, $15 million or something like that. And then you're getting guys who control high leverage type guys. And it's relatively cheap for both. Like you and me, like I'd rather have Daniel Hudson and Joe Kelly for 7 or 8 million each, as opposed to Kenley Jansen for 15 million.
Yeah, absolutely.
By himself.
Absolutely agree with you that. So, looking at other predictions, and we'll have more content. There's probably a Daniel Hudson video already up by the time you're watching this. So, some more content there. Other predictions, just looking at guys. I mean, Treinen, Gratterall, Bickford, Vesia, Canely, Ferguson. Is there another prediction that you want to make about maybe one of those 5 or 6 guys? Maybe a guy that's going to exceed expectations. Maybe a guy that's going to fail to meet expectations. Is there a guy in there you like?
Yeah, I mean, as far as exceeding expectations, and I know like expectations are really high, but I'll say Alex Vesia. I think he's gonna come out and have like I think at this time next year we might be talking about Alex Vesia as like one of the best left-handed relievers in all of baseball. I just think the stuff is there. I think he he's in the right organization to optimize him. Like you see the numbers, what they were with Miami. And I think it was just clear, like they didn't really know how to best use this guy. And Andrew Friedman said, "Hey, give him to me." And here we are a year later, and he already had one great season. And I'm saying next year he's going to have an even better one.
I like that one. I'm with you on Vesia. I'm going to go Evan Phillips as a guy that I think is going to exceed expectations. And I know there's a pocket of Twitter that the expectations are high. You just look at the stuff, the spin rate, the slider, it all fits. It's kind of a Billy McKinney type situation where there's a guy with no options left that they keep sticking around on the roster. And Phillips, of course, the difference between Phillips and McKinney is one of those guys produced and seemed to justify the inclusion, and the other guy did not. But I like Evan Phillips. I think he sticks on this roster. Now, we're talking about with Hudson is there, and if Joe Kelly comes back, then all of a sudden things start to get crowded. Some of those guys, have some options. So some of those guys could end up back in the minors to start the season. Who knows? Ferguson, Canely, whether both of those guys are ready. I mean, the odds that you go 8 for 8 on your 8 bullpen arms all being healthy on opening day seems low. But I like Evan Phillips as a guy that I
pretty sure. I'll put the odds at like as close to
and Gratterall. I mean, Gratterall is a perfect example of a guy that could easily start the season in the minor leagues. Like, he could come out and he's wild and he's spring training and, hey, we need some more seasoning and we're just going to let this thing shake out. So Evan Phillips will be a positive.
And also, like, Caleb Ferguson, I don't know if he's a guy you could just, like, pencil into your opening day rotation. Maybe they want him to spend a month or two in the minors to kind of, find his form, make sure he's fully healthy. Like, when you're comparing pitching in the big leagues to even pitching in AAA, just like the stress, I would say, like, it's just so much different. So maybe they just want to let him, go find his form for a couple months, and then like around May or June, then we see Caleb Ferguson. So there's definitely guys who are going to figure into the Dodgers' plans, but maybe not on opening day.
Well, there you have it. Dodger bullpen, 2021, one of the strengths of the team. 2022, like the lineup, like the starting rotation, probably in better shape than you thought they were coming into this episode. Thanks for joining us. That's Daniel Starkand. My name is Jeff Spiegel. We appreciate you as always. Check out DodgerBlue.com, DodgerBlue1958, everywhere on social media for the latest. And if you are not already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, DodgerBlue1958, and ring the notification bell for breaking news as the offseason goes along. That's Daniel. I'm Jeff. We appreciate you. We'll see you next time.